All right, everybody, welcome back. Psych Guys podcast. Dr. Jun Chun, Dr. Logan Noon, we're psychiatry residents, and we're back for another episode.
We're back. I think this is going to be episode 32, if I
Something like that.
calculated right.
Yeah, something like that. We're on a roll.
We're on a pace.
Yeah, we've produced quite a number of podcasts already. That reminds me, totally unrelated to what this podcast is going to be about. But did you hear about that thing with Meghan Markle and her Spotify deal?
I heard she got let go or something.
Yeah, they canceled her contract. So the contract was I think she recorded 12 episodes in the span of 2 years.
Okay.
And in the 12 episodes, she didn't even do the interviews herself in all of them. It was asynchronous. She had her staffers record herself and get the response, and they just kind of edited it together, try to make it look like it was a live production, but it wasn't.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, just know, Logan, Meghan Markle couldn't produce 12 podcast episodes, and here we are at episode number 30 something.
Yeah, see, now Spotify has a couple extra dollars laying around. Throw it our way. Support us a little bit.
Heck yeah. And for the audience members out there, if you guys want to support us, please share the episode with your friends and families, and please reach out to us. Write us an email, especially if you wanted to come on and discuss another mental health topic or anything that you're passionate about. As long as it's relevant to the world of mental health, we'd love to have you on.
Great. I just want to echo that. I was just kind of, joking around. Me and you are in a very, I think, lucky position, right? We're currently psychiatry residents, not making very good money, right? But our future careers will be very fruitful. So, in reality, we don't actually really truly need more financial support right now. What we need is our audience to engage with us. I think that's what we're looking for the most. We want to know who our audience is, how we can better serve our audience, what you guys are getting out of this, what you guys maybe think we should cut out from this podcast. Because I think that's all we really care about, is producing quality content that people actually find enjoyable and valuable.
Right. And building a community with our audience. And like I said, we want you guys to be an active participant. And what better way than to engage with us and maybe even come on the podcast yourself if you'd like to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Logan, you said you're a psychiatry resident. You don't have much money right now. You know who does have a lot of money?
Nice segue. You're a professional, bro.
Hey, 30-something episodes.
Yeah,
I'm learning.
Yeah, there we go.
I'm learning. All right. So, Logan, I know you're going to ask why I wanted to do this episode. See, I think we're building that chemistry.
Tell the audience what we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I still got a lot to learn. All right, so here we go. Today's episode, we're talking about the influence of the pharmaceutical industry on mental health in general. And the reason why I wanted to do this episode today is because what's making the news? Recently, it's going around that Anderson Cooper, he makes a bit of change out over in CNN. And I'm sure you guys are aware, unless you've been living under a rock, there's a presidential candidate, RFK. And he's been on a bunch of podcasts, and one of the, I don't even want to say it's controversial, but one of the hot topic statements that he mentioned is that he claimed that Pfizer funneled $12 million to CNN, specifically to Anderson Cooper, as a deal to promote mRNA COVID jabs to the American public. So I try to do a bit of fact checking myself, and turns out you can't really even verify that Anderson Cooper is in fact receiving $12 million. But whatever that number may be, I'm sure it's a lot higher than what we're getting paid right now. So good for Anderson Cooper. But going back to the topic for today's show is the fact that how much of this money is actually coming from the pharmaceutical industry.
Right.
Because we know that pharmaceutical industry, they spend a lot of money on ad revenues. And they do, we all know, we've all watched TV before. I mean, we're one of 2 developed nations, us and New Zealand, that allow direct to consumer advertising by the pharmaceutical industry. Yeah. We're definitely in the minority in that. We're somewhat of a special case. The question really is how much of these media companies' ad revenue is coming from these pharmaceutical companies.
Right.
So just want to share, where this claim initially came from. So basically CNN, of course, they're denying it. They're saying this is completely fabricated. Mm-hmm. RFK alleged that Anderson Cooper is making $12 million and that up to 75% of that is coming from Pfizer. So, this is what he said. Quote from RFK. Anderson Cooper has $12 million a year annual salary. Well, $10 million of that is coming from Pfizer. His boss is not CNN. His boss is Pfizer. All right, so I was looking into the fact check, right? APA fact check here. And they reached out to the RFK campaign, and what they said was, I'm going to read this to you directly verbatim. RFK campaign states that, quote, this was a rhetorical comment based on a huge proportion of television advertising revenue that comes from pharmaceutical companies. Since they contribute as much as 80% of TV ad revenue, close to $10 million of Mr. Anderson's salary originates from Big Pharma. To use Pfizer as a stand in for Big Pharma was a rhetorical flourish and not technically accurate. So they're kind of walking back to statements, but not really. I think essentially they're pretty much doubling down. They're saying, okay, maybe not Pfizer specifically, but from the pharmaceutical industry, a huge proportion of the funding from CNN comes from, pharmaceutical industry. And of course, if that's where the revenue is being generated, that's the money that they're using to pay all their employees. So if such a big proportion of the company that you work for, their revenue is coming from this big client, right? We'll just group all the pharmaceutical companies together. Doesn't it make sense that in that case, there can be an argument that could be made that instead of CNN being the actual boss, it is in fact the pharmaceutical industry? What do you
Right.
think, Logan?
Right. And it just makes me think a lot about how, it's not like Pfizer or these other industries are targeting CNN, right? I'm sure all those other competitors that they have, MSNBC, Fox News, you name it, are also supported in a similar fashion with advertising revenue supported from Pfizer. This commercial or this segment brought to you by Pfizer, blah, blah, blah. And, we keep saying Pfizer, but it's really all of them. In preparing for this episode, listening to that ratio you were describing, like roughly, who knows, 80% or a majority of Anderson Cooper's salary could be maybe directly correlated with the pharmaceutical industry. I was watching this video by this psychiatrist who was talking about a lot of pharmaceutical companies. The vast majority of their revenue doesn't go into investment of new research for new drugs, development of how to better implement those treatment modalities. In reality, a lot of their revenue, this guy was claiming 80%, but I don't know if that's verified, so I'm not going to claim it, but a lot is actually in marketing and lobbying. So it's really, in my eyes, just the pharmaceutical industry trying to target ways to make more money, ways to influence Congress people or other people in government on how to make these drugs easier to get into market, how to be less liable for when these drugs potentially or treatments potentially do cause harm. It just, I studied economics in college. I do believe in the power and the ability of capitalism, but I definitely think that capitalism taints healthcare. And I think that this is a clear example of it.
Absolutely, Logan. I think, as a young boy aspiring to go to medical school, become a
A young Jim.
psychiatrist, oh yeah, taking you decades back. Well, maybe not decades, several years back. I had always thought that pharmaceutical companies, I mean, this is what we're told, right? The reason why drugs are so expensive here in the United States of America is because this is where all the innovations happen. We have access to new drugs coming to market that other people don't have. And that's usually the justification I've heard for the incredibly, unfair and high prices. But facts, I can confirm, because I did find in my research as well, pharmaceutical companies, in fact, do spend more money on advertisement than they do on research and development.
Right.
So I think at the minimum, it was very disappointing to hear that. But what else is new? Me being disappointed in pharmaceutical companies. I feel like, especially the last 2 years, it's been an ongoing trend as we learn more and more. And maybe some of this has to do with, the fact that we're residents now, we're interacting face to face with the pharmaceutical systems and the medical system at large. So maybe we're just, more at the front line of some of these issues that are happening. And maybe
Mm.
this is part of our professional development to witness some of these very real realities that are happening and how it impacts patient care. So Logan, I sent you a little graph and I want you to pull that up. So
Okay.
you talk about, like, you mentioned, it's not just CNN, and it's all these other companies that are taking pharmaceutical revenue as well. So this is a graph that shows the
You
top
airdropped this to
five.
me, June?
Yes. Do you not see it? Let me send it
Unfortunately.
to you one more time. All right, there you go. Just accept it. So this is a graph of the top 6 media companies. We have ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. And this documents the top 5 advertisers for each network and what percentage each one of those 5 top advertisers make up. So just take a look at it, because some of them are like, all 5 of them are pharmaceutical companies. Like, do you have it up, Logan?
Unfortunately, no. Technical difficulties here
Technical
on the Psych Guys.
difficulties.
I went to download it and I did, and now I don't see it anywhere in my downloads.
All
why
right,
don't you
guys,
show
we're going to do it
me?
the old-fashioned way. I'm just going to pass my phone over to Dr. Noon here.
All right. Top
Yeah,
5
take a look.
primetime news advertisers per network. It's showing on the x-axis ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. You know, the big portion, Humira, I'm seeing, Dupix, I don't even, Cologuard. Yeah, it's nearly all pharmaceutical companies except, oh, here we go. My Pillow is huge on Fox News. Isn't that hysterical?
That's the conservative pillow.
Right. You know, it just makes me disgusted, because of course I have had patients come in asking me about the newest drug, and then I ask them, it's like, well, yeah, but do you know how much that drug actually costs to use? And why, in your opinion, is it better? And typically it's better because I actually saw it on the news. And I heard about it. It popped up on maybe my Instagram feed now, right? We just are talking about all these channel TV advertisements, which I actually think is a lot old school media, right? Like, old people are on more medicines. So therefore, that's where they're typically going to advertise. Old people typically tune into those kind of cable networks. People of our generation, you know, where do we get most of our news? Typically through our phone. So I imagine as our society evolves, the pharmaceutical company is even going to become more enthralled, advertising their medications on social media platforms, you know, like scrolling through TikTok and Instagram like that, you know, get your Cologuard poop checked. You know, it's just, I wanted to share a story. I just attended the American Psychiatric Association National Convention in San Francisco. My first time going to a national convention. It was really a great experience. I encourage you to go to one, and really anyone who's in this space of a mental health professional to check out one of these conferences. It was invigorating, very cool, and sponsored in part by pharmaceuticals. It is. You know, you open these brochures of what's going on at the conference, and it seems like every third page there's a full page print of some new pharmaceutical drug. So I went up to this one table because I was thirsty on one morning, and this booth had a nice Harley sitting there, and I asked if they were raffling it. They weren't, but they had lemonade, and I was like, I want some lemonade right now. So the booth I went up to was Symbyax. Are you familiar with this
No.
drug? Okay, so I bet you've heard of it. It's a combination medicine. Fluoxetine with olanzapine.
Okay.
Prozac with Zyprexa, but you know, it goes under the trade name Symbyax. So just for the listeners, you know, fluoxetine and olanzapine, these are medicines that, you know, Prozac, fluoxetine has been around, I don't even know exactly how long, but a long time. Olanzapine's been around not as long, but still a pretty fair amount of time as well. So this Symbyax is a combination of these two medications. Olanzapine, 3 milligrams, fluoxetine, 25 milligrams. Pretty standard dosing at the end of the day. You know, there's different dosing regimens that you can choose. But I asked these marketing reps, I was like, okay, look, I'm not opposed to using Symbyax. You know, I use fluoxetine, I use olanzapine, I've used them for patients in combination before. This is nothing new to me. So does your pill work synergistically in some fashion? Is there some other component of this that makes it even more enticing? And they could not answer that question at all. And I consider that a pretty softball question. How are you sitting there trying to sell a combination medicine and you can't tell me why it's better to be combined into one medicine? So I looked this up on goodrx.com, you know, before meeting with you tonight. And remember, this is GoodRx. Maybe you could find different prices elsewhere. But Symbyax, the retail price without insurance, without using any GoodRx coupons, was $258 per month. Using a GoodRx coupon, you could get it either at CVS or Rite Aid for $72.32 for a 1-month supply. Now, isn't it more cost effective to prescribe a patient those same two medicines at a much cheaper fashion? So this is what I looked up. So if I were to then instead prescribe that same patient fluoxetine and olanzapine separately, it's remarkably cheaper. You could get a fluoxetine month supply subscription at Rite Aid for $5.50, and olanzapine you could get for $6.02. So this is essentially a $60 savings each month by just prescribing them separately. Like, why are we doing this? Why are we trying to fake that these combination medicines are going to be so much better than just using an old school kind of technique, prescribing, two separate prescriptions? Maybe the dosage isn't exactly the same of Symbyax. I get that, but this is ludicrous to me. And this is what makes me angry, and this is what I get most frustrated with our system.
Pharmaceutical company presence at the APA conference. I think that just encapsulates the relationship of industry and academic medicine, right? Or maybe even medicine in general, because it's not uncommon that these pharmaceutical companies will come to a physician's office. They'll be like, hey, like, come out to this dinner, we're going to take you out to a really fancy restaurant, and there's going to be this lecture, right? They lecture us about how great their drug is. And of course, we don't have to prescribe it, but if let's be honest, if somebody's taking you out to dinner, they're telling you about these medication, at the minimum, the next time you have that patient with certain symptoms that you heard about at this lecture, you're going to think of that medication, right? So at the very minimum is that, right? And I think we have to recognize that there's an inherent relationship between industry and medicine, but at the same time, we have to remember what the core goal and mission of each party is, right? As physicians, right, theoretically, we're supposed to be practitioners of well-being, right? We're supposed to heal people. Versus the pharmaceutical companies, right? They're companies, they're conglomerations, they're beholden to their stockholders, and at the core of it, their fundamental role is to generate revenue. So there's a fundamental mismatch of the direction of wherever you want to take a certain plan between physicians and pharmaceuticals, right? At least that's the way it should be. I mean, there's a lot of physicians that are enthralled in the business, the entrepreneurship aspect of medicine as well. So at times, physicians can sway a little bit too far into that profit-driven world as well. But I think that's a very important distinction. And I think all providers, all prescription writers have to be aware and constantly remind themselves of that fact, that at the core of what we do has to be the patient's ultimate outcome, that they have a better outcome at the end of the day, because we already have this really powerful force on the opposite end that's trying to gear everything towards profit, right? They see patients more as a consumer, or maybe even a product at the end of the day.
Right. Sadly, though, I don't even know if that's just pharmaceutical companies, right? Like, look at big healthcare networks. It does seem like, do they always really care about the outcome? In a sense, maybe they do on a piece of paper on their theory on their website, but is it more just they want to see more patients, generate more billing codes, generate more revenue? So sadly, I kind of feel it's one within the same sometimes, and that's why I'm personally a proponent for like kind of a Medicare for all kind of approach, because I do just think that capitalism can't exist in its true nature in a healthcare setting. The consumer doesn't know what they're buying. They have to trust our opinion. We went to years of training, and at the end of the day, I still feel in medical training, one of the things that's missing the most is making decisions in the most cost-effective manner. We are taught about this in some ways, in some regard. But I also feel we're taught on the other end, and I feel like that's what we're scared the most of is, well, if you don't do this, you might get sued. And we're afraid of that other cost too. And so I think one of the other things that's wrong with the system is the liability component, and also, the for-profit entities that exist, even if they're covered by not being a nonprofit entity, they're still at the end of the day trying to get as big as fast as possible.
Right. But Logan, I think you'd agree with me here. As we discussed on previous episodes, not all cases of quote unquote illness needs medication, right? If you have mild depression, you may not need medication, right? But I don't think, because we have all these external influences, we have, pharmaceutical industry every day. In medical school, we're taught day after day, like, hey, if a patient presents with these symptoms, you prescribe Y. So, just imagine, like, anybody working any kind of job, if they're told something every day after day, if you see this, you're going to do Y, right? Unconsciously, that's what you're going to ultimately reflex back to whenever you do have that situation arise in real life.
Hmm.
So the concern that I have is, with all these external influences, the most powerful being the money and the power of the pharmaceutical industries, are physicians going more and more towards just simply grabbing their prescription pad? Well, I guess EHR now, you just send it
Right.
electronically. Are we gravitating more towards just prescribing medication rather than considering the whole person, as an individual who can benefit from other modalities? A lot of things we talked about on this channel is meditation, yoga, stuff like that, therapy, right? And I'm bringing this up because recently we discussed screening for depression in children, right? And we
Hmm.
both kind of voiced our concerns that yes, screening can be a good thing, but we were both concerned that it may just reflexively lead to just medicating more children.
Right.
There's some news on that front, and I want to see your reaction. Okay, so this is an article that was recently published in NBC News. It's titled "Children with Anxiety Are Prescribed Medications but Little Therapy," and I'm going to read you a portion of it. As the number of youth with anxiety disorders has risen continuously since 2006, the number of children receiving psychotherapy has decreased.
Mm.
The proportion of doctors' office visits for anxiety that included therapy decreased from 48.8% during the first study period to 32.6% during the last. But the proportion of anxiety medications prescribed during these visits held steady at over time at about 60%.
Right.
So to be completely fair, the rate of prescribing medications has not increased, but this definitively states that physicians are shying more and more away from, like non-invasive modalities such as mindfulness,
Right.
CBT, yoga, whatever else it may be. There's so many other things that you can do that's beneficial for your health, right? These lifestyle modifications, and I wonder if some of that, or maybe even a lot of that, has to do with some of these influences that we may not even notice at times because of how prevalent and pervasive it is, such as the money from the pharmaceutical industries.
Right. And it makes me think a lot about how, money directly from prescribing med X, whatever. But it's like the pharmaceutical companies obviously spend a great deal of money on lobbying. How does that influence insurance billing codes? Because me and you both know that one of the issues that psychiatrists run into is we get paid more money for our prescription time with patients than we do psychotherapy. And some providers, excuse me, do choose to add in psychotherapy, but they can't see as many patients. It just is what it is. I still want to always include psychotherapy. I'm passionate about it, but it makes me think a lot about how many other entities are we seeing that also want the ability to prescribe psychiatric medication? Is it the pharmaceutical industry that's maybe also pushing that to get more drugs in more people? People that I feel aren't always maybe as qualified. Individuals who perhaps didn't even go to medical school. Like there are certain states that allow therapists who have never went to medical school, did any medical training, are now pushing for the ability to prescribe SSRI and other SNRI, typical antidepressant medication. That deeply concerns me. I actually think the solution should be completely the opposite. In reality, I think that I wish, psychiatry training is 4 years long, residency. I would argue maybe too long, but whatever. I wish a lot more of our time was spent on psychotherapy. I wish a lot more of our incentive structures was for psychotherapy. The same with our nurse practitioner and PA colleagues. Like, I wish all of us would spend more time doing this kind of stuff, like you're saying, to build those lifestyle kind of modifications rather than just the simple approach: more people, more medicine equals better.
Doesn't it at times feel like we're just a cog in this giant apparatus that we call the medical industrial complex?
Definitely sometimes, and that's why I get so excited about doing this podcast. I hope that this podcast can maybe lead to both of us maybe having a practice one day that we can kind of design in our own way. And hopefully this podcast also serves as a way to empower patients and also providers to approach medicine in a better, more healthy way. Now I'm curious, June. I'm sure the listener all of what we're saying is probably all that not surprising, right? This is not like new revelations of the pharmaceutical industry having nefarious intent, or, trying to influence us through ads and influence our Congress people. But I don't think the solution either is to say, well, okay, the people prescribing medicines can't talk at all to the people who are, investing in research, trying to develop these new techniques and modalities. What would a healthy relationship between these two entities look like to you?
I think it all comes back to the patient centered approach to healthcare, right? We have to remember that not all cases of, I'm just going to use depression as an example, right? Not all cases of depression need medication. I think we need to do a better job of educating our patients about some of the potential downfalls of being on antidepressant medications. I read a stat the other day, up to 50% of people on SSRIs experience side effects,
Hmm.
right? How many times have I said that to my patients? I'm going to be honest, not many. I'll discuss some of the most commonly experienced side effects, but I'll never go down into the details of like what exactly can happen. Some of that is because I believe that in that case, the patient needs to be on medication, so I don't want to potentially scare them away.
Hmm.
But I also wonder, like, how much of that is due to the structure of the system, right? And not just the structure of us being incentivized from billing perspective to have that patient on medication, but also in terms of the time structure, right? We don't get much time to talk to patients.
Right.
So if we're talking about a diagnosis, if we're spending time educating that patient on what they're going through, what our recommendations are, that leaves very, very little time to have that discussion of side effects. I don't know if that's been a similar experience for you. And you were saying that a lot of this isn't going to be like a revelation to a lot of our listeners, and you're absolutely correct. I think this is hopefully it is very common knowledge, because I think as providers we do need to be very aware of these facts. But in the course of me preparing for this podcast, I did learn a few things that did surprise me. So I'm hoping that this is something that you didn't know as well. I think, if you're a more seasoned, more experienced psychiatrist who's been around for several decades, this is probably not news to you. But for a newly minted psychiatrist like me, I certainly was very surprised by this. So Logan, how do you feel about the PHQ-9?
Hmm.
And before you answer that, can you just quickly explain what PHQ-9 is to the audience? Because there's people listening that aren't necessarily psychiatrists or involved in
Right.
the medical profession at all.
The PHQ-9, I don't know where it is in the exactly when it was created and all these things. It was a very typical.
I'll tell you.
Okay, it's a very typical rating scale that we use to analyze depression. It's like PHQ-9, 9 questions, to try to see basically how severe someone's depression is. There's kind of other versions of it too now. There's like PHQ-2, that's kind of quicker. But, I think it can be a good thing, just because, look, at the end of the day, us psychiatrists, we have so little objective measures. At least the PHQ is something.
Right. It's a screening document, right? It's
Right.
supposed to, it was designed to be delivered in a primary care setting. So,
Hmm.
like your family doctor, your internist, because obviously they're not as trained in the world of mental health as a psychiatrist is. So, it was meant for, in the primary care setting for them to quickly screen patients and then reroute them to mental health services if
Hmm.
needed. And since the PHQ-9 came out in roughly the year 2000, and since it came out, antidepressant prescriptions have increased threefold here in the United
Interesting.
States.
Interesting.
So
Wow.
hearing that, do you feel like that's a good thing, bad thing, or neutral?
Hmm. Well, look, I think that for many, many, many years, depression was seen as a weakness, right? And underdiagnosed, and using medication was, oh, you should just tough it out, pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of approach. Um, so I think it's possible to both under and over treat a problem at the same time. Like, I think a lot of times, I think mostly of like our older generations, right? Who were I will never take a medicine like that ever. And maybe now over the last decade with COVID and everything that's been going on, people are more open to it. But that being said, kind of like you said earlier in this discussion, if someone has a PHQ-9 score that indicates they have mild depression, or remember that PHQ-9 is just like a sliver in time, right? It's not yeah, it asks you what you were like over the last 2 weeks, but if you took that same questionnaire 2 days later, would it give you the exact same results kind of thing? It's supposed to be a 2 week time interval. So I think a lot of times maybe it produces a result. Oh, this person has mild depression, therefore I'm supposed to give them X. And yeah, I think a lot of times patients don't always even understand the basic concepts of SSRI therapy. They're like, wait, this takes a month to work. Why would I even want to
Yeah.
do this? It's like, well, no one's explained that to you. Like, it's gross. It's sickening. It makes me quite sad.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So when I first heard that, I was like, I thought it was good. I was like, hey, look, we know there's a lot of undiagnosed depression out there. So
Hmm.
people are getting the treatment that they need. Yeah, we should be screening. We should be trying to identify as many of these individuals as possible. And if appropriate, if absolutely needed, we give them the appropriate medication recommendations.
Right.
Right. And here's the part that, that was kind of shocking for me. And, I'm interested to see your reaction. All right, fill in the blank. PHQ-9 brought to you by
Oh man, I don't even want to know the answer.
Pfizer. You guessed it.
Damn it.
Is that surprising to you?
I mean, I guess not. Yeah, right. Like who? Because look, like that. I know the PHQ-9. Look, do I know the intricacies of how it was made? No, but I know it went through quite extensive testing to make sure it did produce objective data. That how long is this going to be? How like to actually produce meaningful responses in the patient. All that investment is literally investment, money. Resources. Who at the end of the day has these money and resources to put in this kind of investment? A lot of times it's not always these academic institutions or not even healthcare, like hospital networks, but yeah, pharmaceutical companies. So yeah, I guess I'm not surprised, but definitely bummed.
Yeah, a little bit disappointing to
Right.
you learn stuff like that, right? And just another
Is the
fun.
P for Pfizer? Yeah.
Hey, it very well could be.
Right.
Another fun fact. So Pfizer released Zoloft about 9 years before they came out with the PHQ-9. So
Okay.
we could start like retrospectively, connecting the dots and saying, oh, these people are bad. But, at the same time, right? We didn't have a screening document like this before, and PHQ-9 is a very valuable resource. So that's the conundrum, right?
Right.
Sometimes, the pharmaceutical industry does absolutely provide an essential service to the world and to our patients.
Hmm.
But the only issue is that their main motive is, like we talked about this earlier. Like, what do you think? Antidepressant, since the development of PHQ-9 has increased 3 times. So Pfizer, I bet they're really happy that people are getting the treatment that they need, or are they happy that they're selling more Zoloft?
Right.
And that's the biggest criticism against PHQ-9, right? It was designed with, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say with good intent, right? It was designed to be a screening document. We know that there's untreated depression out there. We want to identify individuals. And if needed, we want to put these individuals on medication. But the way that it can be unfortunately misused at times is in some of these primary care settings where the provider may not necessarily have as in-depth of knowledge when it comes to mental health as a psychiatrist would, is being used as more of a quick way to fit in, to neatly fit into that 10-minute physician appointment. And it can easily come out as somebody who needs medication. So it's being used as a way to kind of just 10-minute visit, we'll hand them a script, send them on their way.
Right.
Where the way it was initially intended to be used was, hey, if there's concerns on the screening, we have to refer them to mental health services so that they can actually go through the diagnostic criteria and evaluate what type of modality of treatment is in the best interest of this patient. So I think, the overall theme of what I'm trying to get at in this episode is we always have to be vigilant because there needs to be a balance, right? There's all these external forces that are so prevalent, so powerful that we may not even perceive them at times. And I think, as physicians, we think we have everything figured out at times. I think we all, you have to have somewhat of an ego to become a physician.
Right.
And I think that's the biggest trap that we can fall into. Thinking that, when we see X, we need to prescribe Y. I think we need to slow down, take a step back, and really ask ourselves, what is in the best interest of this patient? because not, as we keep saying, not every case of depression needs an antidepressant. There's side effects associated with it, and there's other things that you can try before you put them on medication. And when that time comes, and if it is needed, it is absolutely necessary at times. And antidepressants provide a great service to our society today. It's been helpful for a tremendous number of our patients. But the only worry that I have is there's all these forces that may be encouraging people to get on these medications when it's not actually needed, and they do so without recognizing the full scope of the pros and the cons.
Right, right. And I guess my takeaway, before we end this episode is, I'm finishing my rotation at the Veterans Affairs Clinic. I've enjoyed it, and their EMR is not the best. But one thing that is really cool is, since it is such a big hospital network, I think it is actually the biggest, the Veterans Affairs, because it covers all 50 states, is built directly into it is when you select a medicine, you can see exactly what that medicine costs per day. And it's kind of cool. So I feel like whenever I'm seeing a patient in there, whenever I'm putting in an order, yeah, I consciously am aware, oh, okay, that costs 1 cent a day, 5 cents a day, kind of thing. And you calculate it out in your head. Where I've used other electronic medical systems at other hospitals, that information is not there. So I think if that was mandated into every single electronic medical record kind of software, ordering software, I wonder how that would influence physicians' decisions, nurse practitioners, and PA's decisions into selecting particular medicines at every time. How would that influence how they could help that patient that is dealing with poverty, and how that is influencing their mental health? So that's one thing that I really want to try to influence the future of entire healthcare, hopefully through this podcast. Well, cheers, June. That was 35 minutes. If you guys have made it this long, please leave us a review, send it to one of your friends. Yeah, come back for more. Thanks for tuning in.